The Industrial Revolution drew people out of the fields and into the factories. But what caused this shift? What caused the majority of people to move from the farms to the factories in virtually a blink of an eye in human history? The factor that drew them into the cities was the amount of new factory jobs in the cities with a slightly higher standard of living. These jobs are not all that much better than farming though, and were not enticing enough to bring the farmers out of their fields. Something forced them to leave, something revolutionary, something that took the farmers' jobs, forcing them into the city. Something called the Combine Harvester. Before the invention of the Combine Harvester, there were 3 steps to harvesting: reaping, threshing, and winnowing. Reaping was a process by which crops were cut and gathered. Traditionally, this was done by use of a scythe until the reaper was invented in 1826 by Patrick Bell. This reaper was towed by a team of horses. Threshing was the process by which the grain, or edible part of the plant, was separated from the stalk, or inedible part of the plant. This was traditionally done by hand by use of a tool called a flail, but with a bushel of wheat taking an hour to thresh, a mechanical solution was needed quickly.
Ain't nobody got time for that!
In 1786, the threshing machine was invented by Andrew Michael, but more on that later. Winnowing was the process by which the grain was detached from the chaff. In ancient times, people would use a process called wind winnowing. This used the wind to blow the lighter chaff and bugs off the heavier grain. Winnowing was the first of the 3 processes to be mechanized, with the invention of the winnower in 1737 by Andrew Roger. The machine generated a current of air that separated the grain from the chaff. Well, we said we were going to get back to the threshing machine, and thus we have. The threshing machine is a machine that combined the processes of threshing and winnowing. The original model was hand-fed and horse-powered. Later, a steam-powered threshing machine was built using a belt powered by a traction engine for power. This machine was capable of separating both the stalk and chaff from the grain, combining the processes of threshing and winnowing. This significantly reduced labor needed on the field, to the point where UK farmers who lost their jobs due to this machine began destroying threshing machines in what is now called the swing riots. These riots, though, were only a glimpse of what was to come. In 1834, American farmer Hiram Moore began work on a machine that would revolutionize agriculture for the rest of time. You guessed it, the Combine Harvester. By harvest time in 1835, the world's first combine harvester was operational. And by 1839, this newfangled piece of equipment had harvested over 50 acres of crops. However, the combine was not adopted for a long time after this. It wasn't until 1885 when the first commercial combine harvester became available for purchase, when Austrian Hugh Victor Mackay accidentally reinvented the combine harvester and branded it under the name Sunshine Harvester in Australia. These combines are horse-drawn, and this remained the standard until Holt Manufacturing Co. of California combined the combine with another piece of newfangled equipment, the steam engine. It made the first self-propelled combine harvester in 1911. This is when combines began to separate into 2 different types: the self-propelled combine and the tractor-drawn combine. After World War II, the tractor-drawn combine began to be used on the fields of developed countries, as most farms already had a tractor and it was less expensive than the self-propelled model. This was the height of the tractor-drawn combine, though. Its downfall began when European manufacturer Claas made a self-propelled combine in 1953 called Hercules that could harvest 5 tons of crops per day. This combine continued to become increasingly more popular, with 1 million combines owned worldwide in 1956 and 3 million combines owned worldwide in 1968. In 1975, Sperry New Holland introduced the rotary head to the combine, which increased efficiency. Around this time, the combine harvester became a necessity to farmers, and family farms mostly disappeared because they could not afford a combine harvester. In the 1980s, onboard electronics were added to the combine, which increased efficiency. Since then, the combine hasn't changed much in the Western world, but as developing countries gain access to the combine and its technologies, the combine becomes significantly altered to suit their purposes. An example of this is the rice harvester in Southeast Asia. The combine has spread around the world, but how has it influenced the world? While today the combine is something we take for granted, it has an astronomical impact on the developed world. To understand this impact, we have to look at what life today would be like without it. First thing that would be different today is the workforce. Canada, a nation that has as many combine harvesters as fields, was very different back in 1867 before the combine. At the time, the first Canadian census came out, which found that of the 3,463,000 people living in the New Dominion, about 343,000 of them were farmers. While this was only 10% of the population, it consisted of 41% of the workforce. Today, there are only 294,000 Canadian farmers, which make up 0.8% of the population and 1.2% of the workforce. This is not the only change combines brought, though. The same 1867 census stated that the average farm size in Canada at the time was 30 acres, which is the equivalent to 12.2 hectares. Today, the average farm size in Canada is 778 hectares. This means that farm size has increased 64 times from what it was in 1867, and that's only the average. The world's biggest farm, which is in Russia and Kazakhstan, is around 1.5 million hectares, a third the size of Wales. This farm obviously uses more than one combine, but the size of this farm would not be possible without the combine harvester. This increase in farm size, though, has huge environmental implications as well. Due to the range of the combine harvester, forested land that traditionally could not be farmed as it was too isolated is now made accessible by the combine. However, the main environmental issues of the combine lie in its sheer mass. An average of 30,000 pounds without any attachments, the combine is quite a burden on the soil below it. One study by the Research Council of Norway found that the sheer weight of the combine harvester can cause permanent soil damage and a smaller crop yield. This may have even caused the greatest ecological disaster in North American history, the Dust Bowl, and through it the Great Depression. However, this is only one way the combine has influenced our daily lives. Have you ever been to the supermarket and seen rows upon rows of bread and other grain products? This is the direct impact of the combine harvester, but the combine has many subtle but major impacts on the lifestyle of developed countries. The first of which is trade. Almost half of the world's wheat is produced in 3 countries: America, China, and Russia. All of these 3 countries are developed countries and therefore have access to the combine harvester. It is therefore no coincidence that these countries produce so much grain. Another impact on lifestyle links back to the workforce. With more low-skilled jobs replaced by the combine, more people end up doing better paying and more productive jobs. This allows economies to flourish both by collecting more tax and having to fund less social welfare. This allows government to put more funding into services such as education and healthcare. This widespread improvement across all sectors of society is what makes the combine such a great invention.